All right, the button is pushed.
I was supposed to turn a comforting green, not a frightening red.
It is
All
supposed
right.
to be red. It's
Okay.
red.
Great. Red is for record.
All right. Thank you so much for coming out on a morning, Saturday, early, too early for me, and definitely too early for Mickey, to talk about community at a Drupal community event. My name is Ben Mellinson. I am a worker owner at Dart Web Development Cooperative and have been since it started 13 years ago. And Mickey has been with us for 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6. It took me a while to find them. They were hidden in this Drupal community thing, and so I found Drupal, and then I wormed my way into Agaric. It's been crazy ever since. So yeah, talking about this topic is something people usually do not think about until they need it, and by then it's a little too late. Their community is already growing and growing and growing, and how do you make decisions when your community goes from like 10 people to 100 even, or how about 1,000?
Drupal's around 10,000, so
Yes.
sort of asking like, how do we currently make democratic decisions in various aspects of life, from our worker-owned cooperative of 6 people to Drupal to like nation-state level. And it's not always the best way right now. And it's coming with sort of the implicit goal of building the most power possible to all people over our own lives. I usually like to say, justice and liberty is the goals, and it's prettier, but it's harder to make sure we're talking about something concrete, people like Frida Kahlo can make a whole career of trying to redefine liberty as the right of rich people to do whatever they want with their property, to the point where he has to argue that, someone in a pit with no options is as free as, the person with the most power on the planet. So as long as he defines liberty that way, then everyone has liberty. But like that's literally like the philosopher of sort of reactionary thought. Justice and liberty are the goal, but like how do you actually get that? We need power, we need equal power. And to have power equally, you need to work collectively. Like we have more power together than alone. So that's the underlying philosophy here.
Right, like in France, when the tax goes up like 0.1%, everyone gets out in the street and no roads are open that day. What stops us from doing that here? So I'll call for a general strike soon. But these are the basic building blocks of freedom that I can think of. If anyone can think of a fifth, we'll be glad to add it. I put free software kind of behind everything. You can see, because it is our foundation, it is the way we own what we do collectively, and we do not have to be at the mercy of any corporation telling us how to use their software. Cooperative platforms, I see it as a way for us to own things together and to own the building blocks of our society together, things that we build, like Uber is a platform, Amazon is a platform. We need to own platforms that are owned by us and built by us and maintained by us in order to be effective and have this liberty that he talks about and not be in the pit. Don't go near that pit. Okay. Oh, that was a Drupal. Right. Drupal is the pit I went into, and I love it. So with that, it's kind of hard to have all of that without a solidarity economy. And that means doing trade amongst people who are aware and get it, and not buying things from corporations when you can. Decorporating. How do you say it? Decorporatize your life. I de-Googleized recently, and I feel wonderful. I don't have to take as many showers. and I don't have to think of many bad thoughts like, God damn you, computer! So it's been a liberating experience. Just very easily how I did it. I got a Proton Mail account, and I set my Google Gmail to have an autoresponder saying, I don't live here anymore. Use this email address. So that's an easy bridge way to get off it. And then I moved into Thunderbird, which is my new home. And it's kind of neat. It feels really good. I check the Gmail now and then, and there's someone I haven't heard from for like 5 years going, hey, where are you? Look, I'm over here. So in Boston, there is a group called Ujima, where they're not a technical group, but they're literally taking this to a hands-on model to the ground to get people. We're sitting at City Hall over there, and it's a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. We had 150 people at City Hall talking about making it easier to incorporate as a cooperative. And they did it. There are now an easier way for a new company to select cooperative when they form. And that just was not there a year ago. So change can be made by many people. Ujima is also doing other things. They're connecting groups like cooperatives mostly with anchor institutions in the Boston area, like Boston Hospital, the colleges, so that we in the community can be the long-term vendors for their operations. Like, why shouldn't Bob and Mary's Donut Shop have better access to these anchor institutions than, say, Dunkin' Donuts or Panera Bread? Why should a large corporation get these jobs? We see it happen, and we don't really take notice of it. I didn't take notice of it until I was in a hospital visiting someone and walking down the hall to the heart unit. There's a Dunkin' Donuts in the hallway. I'm like, wait a minute. First of all, this is really awful. There's this sugary crap thing in the heart surgery unit, and it's a corporation. I think Bob and Mary's Donuts probably would have opted not to be in that hallway. They may have taken the contract, but I think we would be better off if we had humans serving us than corporations.
But yeah, just taking the very well-known fact that local, like if you spend with the local business, the dollars circulate in the economy, but like taking it many steps forward, like how do you actually have control over your community, and you need some kind of economic base. And so the approach Mickey was saying, but like trying to foster small businesses and cooperatives and have like a network of things that can go together. So in Jackson, Mississippi, Cooperation Jackson has a plan like, okay, they're going to have the composting and the farms and the restaurants, like the full like food chain, like literal like ecological and economic inputs and outputs in a full loop, so that there's no points where there's sort of a middleman extracting the community wealth and control. But they're we'll talk a little bit about their model of actually like being democratic later on. And we've already talked a little bit about cooperative platforms. Anything
Yes.
to add?
This past 2 weeks ago, there was a giant platform cooperativism meetup in New York. It's a yearly event. Platform cooperativism, has everyone heard of it?
No, sorry.
Okay, no one's heard of it. I'm leaving. No. Well, it is a movement that was started 5 years ago at the New School in New York by Trevor Schultz, and it is about people owning the platforms that we use. There are 280 platforms in the process of being built right now. Things like ride sharing, home care, bicycle delivery, co-ops, all kinds of ventures. And the Platform Cooperativism Consortium got a $1 million grant from Google last year. And yeah, you say, Google, wait a minute. But it is an outside Google grant. We are not allowed to use any Google things with our grant.
well,
So we're separated
Google's not.
from them. Google's not.
I mean, Google's not saying it's Google Foundation and the people doing it, haven't gotten a lot of pushback from people. Like, does this mean you're going to make us go all into Google? Like, no, everything's going to be completely open source free software. Don't worry. So it was good pushback.
They have not bothered us yet. Yes. And what we're doing is developing a toolkit that is not software, basically. It has some in it, but it's basically a toolkit that would help anyone start a platform cooperative. Like, say you're sitting at home and you want to start a ride-sharing thing or some kind of a daycare cooperative thing. This toolkit would have all the legal information, policies that you need to know about, who to visit in your state government or town government, and be a real aid to you both in a material world and with some software binding it together. So it would have legal aid specifically for your area. Trevor, the founder of this, Trevor and Nathan Schneider, he's a professor at Colorado EDU, they started this, and it's a global thing. So Trevor has been traveling around the world meeting all kinds of people in many countries and starting a platform cooperative group there. So they all met in New York. It was amazing. We met a guy from South Africa who was organizing the truckers to a union type thing that is huge. It will mean the difference of him making pennies and making a good living managing the trucking industry in South Africa, which is now handled by a couple of different corporations that are just evil, as you can imagine. So it helps spark, like, this one man in this one country to do something. Hearing about this platform cooperativism gave him the chutzpah to go on and continue this. This
Just
is
real quick, it was,
Ujima again?
doing cooperative platforms is sort of like, coining a phrase to be like, okay, we know we can have cooperatives, so there's like, electricity cooperatives. And these are pretty conservative, not very, exciting institutions. But the ownership style matters. Like, places that have their electricity provided by electricity cooperative, aside from generally having lower rates and having a little bit less money extracted from the community and going to rich people far away, they've also been more likely to put in fiber along the electric lines, which is the other thing. So the idea is, like, Comcast is a platform. Comcast is, a natural monopoly. Well, not that natural, but like lines going to every house is sort of a natural monopoly. And when those things are controlled by a private entity, you have the situation where Comcast controls a huge amount of our communications, and they're completely hated. Like, they have like a single digit like customer satisfaction. Like, this is how you know it's a monopoly. Like, people hate it, but they don't have a choice. And the idea is that, like, it's hard for us as a small movement right now to say we're going to take over Comcast, although I really think that should be rallying cry, because, again, they're like the most hated company in the country, which is sort of an achievement. But like, it's really hard to say, like, okay, like, we're 5 software developers, like, let's start an alternative to Comcast. But like, it's a little more feasible to say, okay, we're going to start an alternative to Facebook, or aspects of Google, or Uber or Lyft or TaskRabbit and all these things, which are sort of like, no control of the customers and exploiting workers, and like, is there a chance? So it's sort of like, there's a feasible idea that, like, you could move here. So, it's attempting. But yeah, movements. Good.
Yeah, there are so many movements. My work in Agaric is not developing code or anything like that, and I do a lot of outreach mostly. So I'm a member of a lot of networks, and what I do is when I speak to coders, I speak about cooperative things. When I speak to cooperative people, I speak about coder things. I try to get them to come to Drupal meetings, and a lot of them do, which is awesome. So blending these networks and getting them to know about each other, I feel is one of the underpinning things that it's our work to do. Since we're in the soup, we kind of have to reach out and let people know that we're in this soup and come on in, it's delicious.
So that's why I'm so excited about this topic, is that if you have any group of people, especially if they're going to try to change things, you need your own structure for how you work internally. And so with that, and we're going to sort of focus on software communities and Drupal specifically, but we'll enter that part of the talk now. So that's the first point. Is that lots of software communities and governments and everywhere really want to have this idea of people with the most merit are the ones who will rule. And the other thing I meant to mention is that I'm going to have a link at the end that goes to a blog post that Nikki and I did, and then we'll keep updating with new resources. But that's got citations of everything we're going to talk about. So definitely check that out. But then what's relevant here is there's an excellent blog post or essay about meritocracy and its problematicness, and the fact that the word itself was coined as satire and then adopted by people who didn't get the joke. It was in a satirical essay about how meaningless it is to sort of have this self-justifying sort of thing. It's I'm in charge, therefore I must have merit. Is basically the way that the essay did, and then you can understand why people adopt it. It's okay, we want people to people who have the best ideas to have the most influence and all that stuff, but you never define what that is, and you never define how you get there, and so it's the way it's used in academia especially, and then how it's been exported to free software communities. It's very much just a justification for people who have the advantages, have the privileges, are in the in-group to be well, we're here because we deserve to be. And so, it tends to be a self-perpetuating oligarchy type of thing. Just, it tends to have a homogenous set of people and controlled institution. So Drupal is really cool because for a while it's more identified as a do-ocracy, which is okay, it's you can't judge intrinsic merit, but we're a volunteer project, and so those who go ahead and do something are the ones who
stand out,
ultimately make the decisions, and that's a good start. But as you get to have resources and decide how those are distributed, you need another approach. And as a community as a whole, we are sort of at that point. And so, how do we make better decision-making structures? And so, if better decision-making structures are a solution, it's worth being clear what the problem is, and we are. I put this here because I'm, very much pro-democracy and power to the people, obviously. But we basically sort of have to hack ourselves. So the good news is people are problematic in sort of consistent ways, and so there's things we can do to make ourselves better individually and collectively. And this talk of how do we decision-making structures that make work well for us, and the way we have, the way we are human, is going to just touch on a tiny subset of them. But it's the kind of things, if you've gone to the Wikipedia article, list of cognitive biases, that's a great list of oh, okay, this is something I'm naturally going to do, how to try to overcome that. So no one cares about a decision-making process until there's something they don't like. It's you just ignore what's going on until you have a problem. And so, as we've been saying, knowledge is not power. Power is coordination powers organization. And Miriam Kaba, the longtime organizer on ending violence and dismantling the prison industrial complex, who knows a lot about organizing, is someone who knows what they speak of and say that a lot. And so, who are we? Powers organization. Who are we to be organized? And free software contributors are pretty famously hard to organize. Definitely, project managers are likely to be dreaming of herding cats instead of managing developers and designers. And anyhow, just to take a step back into society, I tend to fixate on injustices that are caused by organized, unaccountable minorities, elite groups making decisions that affect a much larger but unorganized majority. That's why powers coordination, money is a way of coordinating people. But I think of traffic jams as an example. There's tons of problems that actually have little or nothing to do with a small group holding power over a large group, or at least doesn't appear to be the main problem. And so this is a classic problem of political science. When you have concentrated benefit and distributed cost, the people who have the concentrated benefit are likely to get their way, because it's sort of like Comcast. They're charging everyone $40 more a month than they need to. But it's a distributed cost across hundreds of millions of people, and it's a concentrated benefit. So they're going to lobby to, keep from being nationalized. They're going to lobby to keep all of that. But the traffic jam, yes, there was indeed actual conspiracy of oil companies to get rid of more efficient forms of transit so that they could have asphalt roads and gasoline cars and rubber tires and sell all of that stuff. There was actual cabals buying up transit and ripping it out. This is historical fact. But the fact that we have this coordination problem of hundreds of thousands of people trying to get from point A to point B, and we're all sitting in traffic for hours a day in multiple major cities in the United States. This is mostly people in the upper income brackets. This is not a problem that's the problem of the environmental racism, where they're constantly there's poor people living near the highway. That's a problem of environmental racism. Mm-hmm. And they place incinerators and that kind of stuff in non-wealthy neighborhoods. But the actual problem of getting from point A to B is affecting lots of people who should be the most politically connected, the most able to do it. They're just not connected to one another in a way that they can solve that problem. But
a good thing to search would be, why doesn't America have high-speed rail trains? That's when I found out about all of this.
Add the link to
really laid it out for me.
I think it's useful to say, just on the benefit, just to speak for the goodwill of humanity, that it's my understanding that these oil and transportation tycoons are not fully aware of all of the harmful effects. When they started along this path, I think
but they are now.
they are now.
And they have been for years.
But isn't the
comment for the recording?
that the full harmful effects weren't known 100 years ago, when we were sort of being put on the path of fossil fuels and personal things.
And it's like cigarettes, it's hard to quit.
Yeah, it's like cigarettes.
I want to add something on the oil companies. They actually went after my father, and the people who went after him came from the White House, so they got some pretty powerful people in their pockets. And
came after your father for what?
well, he wanted to stop. He wouldn't let the Alaska pipeline go through.
Ah.
Oh, so they came after your dad for not allowing a pipeline
And
through.
Nixon White House came after him, and
Yep.
Well, you heard the bill they just passed that now it's a felony to trespass on oil pipeline properties. So there'll be no more protests.
There will be. So, but anyhow, back to traffic jams. You know, that affects people who should be able to coordinate and do something. But I mean, don't worry, technology is going to fix that. Self-driving cars are going to fix that.
Right.
Um,
Self-driving.
This is not a self-driving car. It wasn't designed to be. This is a Jeep that was remotely hacked. Its steering was hooked up to the computer system, which was hooked up to the internet for benefit of the media system. And Jeep had to recall millions of vehicles. And you'd think that even capitalists would figure out a solution to this. Like, we're dealing with computer viruses for, I think, like 1980-ish. That the first one was unleashed on the world by a couple of Unix developers in India who were like, wow, this Microsoft stuff looks really insecure. Like, let's just show them. And like, they put their address in India, like in the virus. Like, they weren't really being malicious. They were just trying, but that spread over there. Anyhow, viruses and that kind of thing is affecting, you know, to the tune of like the large percentage of the world economy is being lost. You know, and it's capitalist firms that are paying the price. But you know, this is another coordination problem that hasn't been solved. So, just making the point that the people currently running things are probably not going to solve very many of our problems. Diving into Drupal, grassroots from the bottom organizing, Drupal and Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. And I just want to say that it's excellent as far as it goes, and we link to it in the group and encourage people to check it out, trying to make sure that everyone feels welcome in the community. But you know, we're at the point in history where there are, you know, sort of grave injustices in the world, and it's the responsibility of all of us everywhere to do something about that. And yeah, so it's sort of like where can power come from in our community, and you know, so sort of who's making decision now, and who is we, I guess, is sort of where we're going to go next. So, according to OLO, which you know counts commits for a lot of projects, half of all open source projects have only one committer. These projects don't have to worry about scaling community decision making. I wasn't able to run the number on Drupal repositories, but it's likely similar. And this actually is sort of a good thing. I think it's critically important because I'm talking about like how do we coordinate, like if you can like give people the freedom to do what they need to do without having to coordinate, that's actually even better. Like as many things as we can move out of a coordination problem, which is really hard, to something like you can just do it. That's fantastic, and that's what's really been what the Drupal community has been built around. You have a core where you have to coordinate, and it's really slow, and it seems to get slower every year. Like the number of 10-plus-year-old bugs that I have been involved in, which I'm sure if I were more involved in helping, like maybe they would be closed now, but I'm mostly just watching. As a very, very slow process of community coordination goes on. But at the same time, I released like 10 contrib modules for this project we're doing. It's because, you know, you can hook into Drupal and do all kinds of things. Like, it's not so much hooks anymore, but it's still plugins and 50 other ways, more than you can keep track of how you can, you know, change the system, but contribute something that other people can use. And so the contrib ecosystem is huge, and that is actually one of the best ways of scaling community decision making. So, you know, anything where you can conceptually say that there doesn't need to be a central bottleneck, that's great. So I mean, it's basically decentralization, and that's a tried and true model. And yeah, so problems you're trying to avoid in a community, and this is just sort of getting to the concept of moderation really quickly. Just to put it in there is one of the things you need to account for is like, you know, this is sort of the experience of being a woman on the internet. Like you get twice as much abuse, like 100 times more abuse than men, and it's like, and this is where the diversity and inclusion project is really strong, and like, how do you provide support systems for that? How do you try to get it down? I mean, the latest example of this, I mean, people have tried, just changing their avatar, not even changing their name, like, and they start getting more abuse, like on Twitter and stuff. And right now, Barrett Brown of the Pursuance Project, which is an interesting way of coordinating by sort of breaking into sort of pods that can talk to each other, but that's sort of vaporware right now. But anyhow, he's an abrasive journalist. He's been banned from Twitter right now because he keeps telling Nazis to go to hell. And he's like who he is all the time. He's going to act the same. And he's been tweeting from his girlfriend's account. And like the kind of responses he gets are vastly different, like tweeting from a woman's name and image as from his own.
Wow.
And then, like the content is the same. So that's just the, like case study number 5 million of the different treatment of men and women online. And so, if you're taking into account how different people are treated differently is key in building your community that I think with the Diversity Inclusion Project, Drupal is starting to come to terms with, and other things are.
I thought no one knows you're a dog on the internet.
And so I think the years in which the open source movement was taking shape, it really parallels the early feminist movement. So this is a quote from the sort of, if you're talking about this topic, you have to cite this essay, The Tyranny of Structurelessness. But just changing out like 3 words in this was, just replacing like women's movement with open source. During the years in which the open source movement has been taking shape, a great emphasis has been placed on what are called leaderless, structureless groups as the main, if not sole, organizational form of the movement. The source of this idea was a natural reaction against the overstructured corporations and universities in which most of us found ourselves, and the inevitable control this gave others over our lives, and the continual elitism of these groups. The idea of openness, structurelessness, however, has moved from a healthy counter to these tendencies to becoming a goddess of its own right. The idea is as little examined as the term is much used, so open. But it has become an intrinsic and unquestioned part of open source philosophy. As the early development of this movement did not much matter, for the early development of this movement, this did not much matter. Open Group was an excellent means to this end, of learning more about open source or feminism. The looseness and informality of it encouraged participation and discussion, and it often supported, and its often supportive atmosphere elicited personal insight. If nothing more concrete than personal itch-scratching insight ever resulted from these groups, that did not much matter, because their purpose did not really extend beyond this. So like when you have small open source projects that are just solving your own needs, like it's great. Like, loose and not much structure is great. And it's just like, that's an essay from like early 1970s, I think. No, it's late 1970s.
Pre-Drupal.
Yeah, pre-Drupal, totally different things, but it's like very similar, like open source groups that, it's like, we don't need structure, like, we're just going to do it. But the point of, it's 1970, it's very early 1970s. That's Joe Freeman on Tyranny of Structuralists in 1970. But the takeaway point is for everyone to have the opportunity to be involved in a given group, and to participate in its activities, the structure must be explicit, not implicit. And this matters more as your software affects more people. And I think this is where sort of it also ties into diversity and inclusion. It's like, we're building software for people who are not ourselves now, and we need to recognize that. And like I haven't checked the schedule carefully enough, but I'm hoping there'll be talk on user testing and that kind of thing. It's like, we know as professionals that we need to, hear from the people who are actually affected. And the question is, can we take another step further and actually put the people who are most affected in charge? or have a proportional representation on that. And so, quickly on some structures that doing that out in the real world. Did you want to take this?
No, that one's yours.
That's totally
Snails. I'm
but
allergic. No.
Zapatista movement in Mexico is drawing on very
Yes.
ancient indigenous approaches to constructing power through networks of autonomous groups. So it's a bit of a federated model, but networks of autonomous villages integrating existing, elements, instruments of power as self-governing bodies for those who are working for, an alternative within, relatively well-known corrupt government and other systems.
But those are small,
Yeah,
small groups. And when it scales, that becomes the issue.
But they've got their, so I guess, to be explicit, like it's sort of a model of scaling where you have each group can just sort of delegate up, and that you just have like circles within circles within circles, and it's a very effective approach, and it's not one you see in many open source free software projects.
Right.
And I think it's a reason is because like when it's sort of like full governmental, like when it's affecting a large chunk of your life, like you can dedicate the time to like work with a dozen people on your immediate needs, delegate one to work with a dozen people that represents those dozen groups, and then you can delegate up. And the thing is that, so it's time intensive, but it actually scales pretty well, because like if you have a group of like 10 to 20 in just like 10 to 12 levels of delegation up, like that group of 12, which is like, or 20 at the top, like which is sort of directly responsible for and sort of instant recallable, like each representative up and down the chain, that's representing the world population. Like it actually isn't that many levels of like quote hierarchy to get up there, but it is time intensive to have that level of communication. And when it's a side project, it's not like what the Zapatistas is doing, which is forming a revolutionary movement, like all encompassing. It's a little hard to scale.
Yes, the way that people can be helpful is by transferring our knowledge, like we do at Drupal camps and Drupal cons, but also I do things like I travel to other countries and I teach people Drupal, an intro to Drupal, and an explanation of free software, and kind of like a mini thing of this and my other things combined, like giving people a view into this and then figuring out what they would like to learn next by conversing with them. Is everyone here familiar with Zapatistas?
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Okay,
So
it's a matriarchal community that is that has formed a revolutionary presence in many places. It's so dangerous that women are assaulted on the streets if they're thought to be a part of Zapatistas, and even worse things are done to men that are thought to have been talking with them or dealing with them. So it's a very scary world where people are trying to free themselves from this horrible patriarchal corporate injustices of being moved to the edges of the town for poverty and stuff like that, and just horrible life stories that these people have had. So they do come together, and now what we're trying to help them with is being secure in their communications, because they don't have much in the way of technical expertise. So I would encourage everyone to look into stuff like that.
real world community of another totally different model. Another one is the Rojava community of Kurds that was recently in the news as being betrayed by the United States, is having like better thought out like forms of, so the in Rojava they're explicitly inspired by the libertarian municipalism of Bookchin, a Vermont philosopher who died relatively recently, but like of federated groups. So sort of the same idea of like you can have autonomous groups that make all their own decisions and then connect with other ones. So that model, which can map to some good technical tools. Lumio is one of the bigger like open source projects on how communities can make decisions, so they can check them out. We'll link to them.
Anyone using Lumio?
Yeah.
2.0 is out. Check it out.
But they don't even, the people building that don't think that scales to like, thousands of people.
Right.
And Drupal is thousands of people. Weakest reason for some sort of democratic governance is still a big one, just so people have a feeling of being heard. So just having an explicit process is going to make feel like there is one. Like you could, so it's not just griping at the edge. Like you have some idea of how to get involved. And so one key point, and I won't read the whole quote because we ran out of time. I'm sorry. This is POCO, but it's not a new idea that those who seek power are precisely those who should not have it. The running gag in this comic book in the 50s was this character being like, the most qualified to be president because he was running away from being nominated. And Douglas Adams makes the same point in Restaurant at the End of the Universe in the Hitchhiker's Guide theory. Those who most want to rule people are, by that very fact, there's least seated to rule. And this isn't a new idea. What Walt Kelly and Douglas Adams were getting at, they weren't the first. The ancient Greeks thought of it, and they acted on it. They had a solution to this, and it's called sortition. It's, I won't get into the inequalities in the ancient Greek city-state, but still, 2,500, 3,000 years ago, they saw these same problems and had a solution that's been used intermittently ever since, which is that you pick who runs things at random. And the idea is that, so it's not someone who's seeking power and is the type who would want to take power over. You draw lots. That person is in the council or is the executive, and people get the resources and everything they need. And it's sort of, this is another way of scaling democracy in a way that actually works better than the sort of representative system we have. And then, let's talk on.
There's an amazing Italian film that just came out like about this. So like the people wrote in, someone like Garibaldi, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was like, but there was a real guy named. If you want to explore this theme, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then, so and Sociocracy is another movement coming out of Europe that I think maps well with the Zapatista way and the libertarian municipalism. That it's interested a lot of worker cooperatives, and it's a fractal circle structure, linked circles, where each group is connected. It's very much a do-ocracy structure. I think it works well for sort of the balance between a volunteer project and having a little more resources decisions. And then, it's not designed at huge scale, but I think you can combine it with sortition so that one of the key decision-making circles is drawn from the community as a whole. And I think the key point in all of this is that, if you just have a do-ocracy, like whoever gets involved does, you end up with repeating inequalities, because the people who get involved are the ones who have the most resources, the most sense of personal power, because they've been told their whole lives they deserve to be in charge.
I was told that.
That's
why I do it. But not many were.
Yeah, and the most time and resources to be the rulers. And so you need some structure of saying that either everyone makes the decision, or we're picking at random, or we're just saying these are the people who are most affected, they make the decision. So Sociocracy has some of that built in the sense that it's mostly working groups. The working group makes, like in the worker-owned cooperative, we don't all get together and say which module we're going to use. Whoever is living with building the site and who is the most technical expertise makes the decision. And Sociocracy can give you some ways of formalizing that in larger scales. Like this group is implementing it. They are this group is autonomous, and they're linked to this group with a double link. So one person is on the group they have to coordinate with as a representative to that group, and another one is on a representative to that. Instead of having one person being the liaison between that, the groups are connected by two people, each with a separate role, one to represent one group and one to represent the other. But they're both
done.
actually in both groups. So we're out of time.
It's the consent-based decision-making that makes that work, to have those different links.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because exactly. So like, no one person can just say like, oh, I've made the decision for you all.
An executive decision has been made.
Right, so like somebody from the linked group cannot consent, and that's where the power, that
Yeah.
creates the equivalence.
Yeah, no. So and I mean, it's it's very much that this idea of autonomy. Like, no group can make another group do anything else. But
Right.
the idea is like, you have a shared purpose of the overall movement or organization, and they use consent instead of consensus. I don't think there's really a difference, but the point is in consent or consensus is that it's not like I'm completely satisfied or I won't do this. It's like, have all of your objections been looked at, and like, can we still live with it after that? So, yeah.
People at the door.
Yeah, so it's just to be like, so what am I going to try? We're going to try to do with all of this is building, is build a software project that tries to embrace some of this, and so we're trying to, or encourage other people to build a software platform, software cooperative that brings it all. So, goals for humanity by way of a software project: we can communicate, we can still in control of our communication. We earn livings which give a degree of freedom, put disadvantaged people first in getting opportunities as they come up. We gain the most power possible over our own lives. We use the experience and collective action this entails to work for justice and liberty for all, like expanding the ability of self-rule out to all as we get better at it. And that we actually need some of this, I think, to succeed in Drupal. You succeed in long-term success by new contributors with new ideas. Now that we're not a small group, it's not easy for people to get involved. And if we don't find ways to make it easy for people to get involved by basically distributing out power, we're going to just keep getting older and more enterprisey and less fun and
Sync.
not do that stuff. So we'll just on. Don't.
Thank you.
So, but it practices democracy, which puts those who are most affected first on every level, I think is the main takeaway. From the labor movement, build institutions at world-changing scale if you ever can. It's a plan, but we'll put it online.
You'll have to go online to see the plan.
This is daunting, but remember this rabbit. Start
If
by
you
eating
remember
a little
nothing
bit of
else.
grass, and that's where we'll put it all online.
Great. Thank you.
And we'll open the door in case people want to come in, but
Yes.
I think we got another 10 minutes at least before the next session, so if anyone has any questions, I'll start here. And we're still recording.
Do I hit this button?